Good morning, colleagues and friends. It's really nice to be with you today. David, thank you for the warm invitation to come and speak. And Parker, that was a really kind introduction. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Here we are late in March, which is mud season in Maine. I know I've been working a lot lately. Perhaps you have too. In my case, it's because we're standing up a new organization, which is a lot of work. And maybe partly because in mud season, there aren't that many other options. It strikes me that we're also entering a season of a different kind. It's a season of uncertainty. Uncertainty in funding and policy at the federal level, and uncertainty about how to adjust to the current realities around us, with more conflict and polarization than we are used to seeing in our country and our wonderful state. We have some idea of when mud season might end, and the full bloom of spring will have us out in our gardens and back on the water. We don't know how long this new season of uncertainty will last. And I was advised in advance, thank you so much, David, that folks in the far corners might not be able to see the slides all that well, so never fear. Everything that's on the slides, I will also speak, so if you can't see very clearly, don't worry about it. Uncertainty can be unnerving and blended with our collective passion to do good work and advance the important projects that we've so eagerly begun. Uncertainty may be leaving some of us a bit at sea. It's a lot of emotional work to be moving forward on professional and personal projects while we're scanning for the latest news and creating multiple layers of contingency plans. And for many of us, we are managing strong feelings at the same time. But as difficult as the present situation is, my sense is that Maine has some key strengths that will help us create opportunity. The first one I want to mention is the groundwork we have already laid. As our work at the state level takes on increasing importance, we have a strong base to work from. The last decade has seen remarkable planning efforts that give us a roadmap for how to move forward and have attracted a vibrant group of professionals to the state who bring excitement and momentum. Many of us are working with a revised Maine Won't Wait report that was released in December and are anticipating the Infrastructure Resilience and Rebuilding Commission final report that will be out in May. There are also many other recent policy analyses and roadmaps on topics like housing and transportation, too many to inventory here, which are helping set agendas. So while this is a season of uncertainty at the federal level, here in Maine, we know where we want to head. The other strength I'd like to talk about today is our networks. Maine has an impressive collection of individuals and groups who are passionate about strengthening communities, so we may leave a healthy environment, a strong economy, and a sense of shared respect to the next generation. Some of the nodes of the network are formal groups, many of them longstanding, some of them recently formed. Quite a few of the nodes are superhero volunteers, people who go above and beyond, and sometimes seem to create a project out of thin air and sheer will. I think we all know that community volunteer, someone in our town or someone that we've come across in our project work who gives countless hours and, in the process, inspires a community to come together. These networks are what has made it possible for Maine to be successful in advancing policies and projects that show real leadership in our country and are more ambitious than what one might expect from a rural state with a small population. It's also what makes it possible for a home rule state with hundreds of small towns to function. Maine has often been described as a big small town. As recently as 10 or 15 years ago, it was possible to know most of the professionals in our area of specialty. That was certainly true for me for much of my career. I remember when I was working for the Department of Marine Resources as the aquaculture policy coordinator in the mid-2000s. I went to a fish health conference in Eastport, and Chris Bartlett from Sea Grant and his wife offered to take care of my son, who was only a few months old. That was so I could attend the conference and still have my infant with me at night. At the conference, the faces were mostly familiar, including our New Brunswick counterparts. It felt like a network that was possible to know well and thoroughly, and that was there to support each other. And when I worked for the Land Use Planning Commission in the late 2000s, it only took about a year before I had a pretty good idea of who was going to want to engage on any particular policy topic, and I'd see familiar faces in the convenience stores in Millinocket and Greenville. The networks were knowable. In my view, that has changed. Let me do a little context setting for why I think that is the case. "50 years ago, it was the era of command and control government. Through the wise actions of people like Senator George Mitchell, for whom the Mitchell Center is named, we saw the birth of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act, all in the early 1970s. That was also the same time when the Land Use Planning Commission, which was Land Use Regulation Commission at the time, was formed to protect what at the time was referred to as the wildlands of Maine. At that time, people expected government to take a principal role in solving problems. In the subsequent decades, people's expectations shifted, and government began distributing those responsibilities to non-governmental organizations. Government still played a coordinating role, but less of the work was done within state agencies. Here's an example to illustrate the point. This example comes from my friend Dave Portermanch, who pointed it out over a cup of coffee a couple of months ago. In the summer of 1991, during the McKernan administration, there was a government shutdown that lasted several weeks. At the time, most of the lake water quality sampling and special studies were done by the Department of Environmental Protection, by DEP staff, and there was limited NGO involvement. Following the shutdown, DEP recognized that the state budget was not going to be able to continue to support extensive sampling by their employees going forward. DEP had developed a network of volunteer monitors, but that effort needed to be offloaded. The volunteer monitoring work was moved to Scott Williams, who was working on DEP contract. That's when the Volunteer Lakes Monitoring Program, now the Lake Stewards of Maine, I think they're here today, was born. Then other NGOs started pursuing funding to pick up other pieces of lake work. Over time, robust lakes organizations like Lake Stewards of Maine, Maine Lakes, Sebago Clean Waters, and many others started to play a much larger role. Now much of the sampling and science work is done by the NGOs with a mix of funding sources. Much of the data is owned by DEP. The agency provides a backbone for the program, but doesn't do much of the actual sampling and science work anymore. In a little over 30 years, we have transitioned from a program that was largely government-run to one that is highly networked. This photo is of Matt Scott, who's an aquatic biologist and ASF-certified fisheries scientist. He created the Maine Lakes Division and Biological Program for the Maine DEP in 1970 and was founder of Maine's Volunteer Lake Monitoring Program, which is the oldest program of its kind in the United States. I just want to acknowledge, gentlemen, all of your work. This trend toward a highly networked, distributed system is not unique to the Lakes program. A similar phenomenon has happened in the topic areas of community planning, housing and resilience. In the early 2010s, there was an abrupt shift in some of the coordinating functions of state government. After intense scrutiny from the administration, in 2012, the State Planning Office was formally disbanded. Those functions were scattered piecemeal to a variety of agencies. This was also a time when state government discouraged discussion of climate. In state agencies, some work that touched on climate was still happening, but quietly and often under another name. Fortunately, many organizations, including the university system, nonprofits, municipalities, counties, Wabanaki tribes, and industry groups, picked up the mantle and moved forward. In the absence of strong state leadership on climate impacts and community planning, extensive networks popped up outside of state government to keep the work going. Those networks were loosely formed in most cases, and it was a time of tremendous experimentation, ingenuity, and creativity. Unsurprisingly, I'm sure to many of you, it turns out that putting all of our eggs in the state government basket, and more recently in the federal government basket, is unwise, and that networks are what create a resilient and adaptive system for public policy and local action. It's also the case, however, that a network with little structure can become overwhelming. As these networks expanded in the 2010s, it coincided with a time when there was a significant turnover of planning and environmental professionals in the state. It's frankly so great to see the age range in the room. It's wonderful to see so many young professionals here. I absolutely love it. The cohort of folks who had been working in these professions was edging toward retirement, and there was an effort to attract a new generation of professionals to Maine. In 2019, the new Mills administration hit the ground running with unprecedented support for climate work. 1 year later, the pandemic arrived, which disrupted how we all worked. Then a year after that, we had a new federal administration which pumped out unprecedented funding for climate and community adaptation work, as well as infrastructure. In the space of 2 years, the policy and funding environment was completely different. At that point, everyone was hard at work, implementing what they had been planning for so many years. New human capacity, new funding, and a sense of urgency combined to set the stage for rapid growth of nodes in the network. Then the arrival of unprecedented storms in 2023 and 2024 that damaged or destroyed half of Maine's working waterfront, and large swaths of our transportation and municipal infrastructure pushed us to work even harder. And what Maine has accomplished since 2019 is astonishing. I'll give you a couple of examples of the funding commitment in just the last 2 years. Maine has invested $60 million, the largest investment in state history, to enhance the resilience of Maine communities, working waterfronts, and businesses following the devastating storms. And in July, NOAA announced a $69 million federal grant. With this funding, multiple state agencies and partners will work with communities to take strong, pragmatic steps to address vulnerabilities, protect people, and ensure critical infrastructure is prepared for future impacts. The NOAA funding includes $9 million for the state's Community Resilience Partnership Program and stands up the staffing for the State Resilience Office and a network of resilience coordinators across the state. These are two examples of the extraordinary funding that Maine has invested and attracted for resilience work. There are far too many other examples to list them all here. And Maine's efforts are getting results. I'll give you some examples from the climate work. We have reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 30% since 1990, making meaningful progress towards statutory targets of a 45% reduction by 2030 and an 80% reduction by 2050. We're progressing to meet Maine's goal of using 80% renewable sources for electricity by 2030. We have exceeded Governor Mills' goal of installing 100,000 heat pumps statewide and set a new, more ambitious target of installing 275,000 heat pumps by 2027. We have reduced Maine's dependence on heating oil from 70% of Maine households in 2010 to just over 50% in 2023, including the largest recorded year-over-year decrease of 6% from 2022 to 2023. And we have grown the clean energy economy to employ more than 15,000 people. These successes were the result of the collaboration of thousands of people and hundreds of groups working together. Our networks grew fast. Perhaps it's unsurprising then that many of us are feeling a little overwhelmed by trying to keep track of all the nodes in these networks. At first, I thought maybe I was losing my touch. Maybe I just couldn't remember as many pieces and parts of the network as I used to be able to. But as I spoke with other people over the last year, I heard similar reactions. People were telling me that it was difficult to understand what resources they should be tapping to learn about opportunities and partnerships for the topics that they wanted to tackle, mostly just due to the challenges of sheer volume of resources and limited time. This has particularly been true when I've spoken with municipal leaders about trying to navigate the funding landscape for community projects. What town manager, community nonprofit, or volunteer group has the time to dedicate hours on end to learning the intricacies of the network. There have been some remarkably effective efforts to bring clarity to parts of the network. For example, the Climate Change Adaptation Providers Network, Maine CAN, and the Regional Resilience Coordinators and Service Providers that partner with a Community Resilience Partnership, to name a few. But despite making important parts of the network more visible, there is still a sense of overwhelm out there. So I wondered what's changed. And I started looking at some numbers. What I found surprised me, and I'd like to share them with you today. To illustrate the change in this dynamic, I'd like to share with you some data about nonprofits in Maine. I recognize that nonprofits are one piece of a larger puzzle. However, it's illustrative, I think, of the general trend. According to the Maine Association of Nonprofits, Maine has 7,596 registered nonprofits. Of those, 572 are private foundations, and over 7,000 are public charities. Of the public charities, 2,500 are large enough that they must file tax returns, and of those, 450 are in the categories environmental or community improvement. That's 450 organizations that are in the categories of environmental or community improvement that are large enough to file tax returns. I don't know about you, I can't keep more than a few dozen organizations in mind at one time. And that's on top of the networks of consultants, municipal, tribal, and county officials, academic and extension professionals, development firms, federal agencies, financial and insurance institutions, and many more. But isn't this the same problem that people have been facing for decades in Maine? Haven't we always had a robust landscape of non-governmental actors who contribute to the fabric of the community? Of course, that has always been true, but I think that there's a real difference in scale that we need to acknowledge. As an example, Maine Association of Nonprofit Statistics for Reporting Charitable Nonprofits in 2000 document 1,862 organizations, which collectively spent $4.5 billion. In 2022, 2 decades later, that had grown to 2,685 organizations spending $15.7 billion. Spending more than tripled in 22 years. Now, I recognize this includes lots of organizations in fields that aren't directly related to our conversation today, but to me, the difference in magnitude mirrors what I've been noticing in the community planning and climate sectors. To be clear, the robust nonprofit sector in Maine has historically been a strength and continues to be a strength today. We need a healthy nonprofit sector to be successful in achieving our goals. And expansion of all that good work may mean we need different tools to understand how to navigate the larger network. Although I think the trend of an expanding network is clear from the history, let me add one more factor that generates beautiful complications: interdisciplinarity. Personally, I've been an interdisciplinarity junkie for most of my life. I think Parker started to point that out earlier. I think that as a child, my mother could have called me the at least try it once girl, because I recall a long series of lessons in teams: viola, basketball, international club, calligraphy, synchronized swimming. My undergraduate majors were biology and English Lit, and I did a Master of Science degree in Wildlife and Fisheries Science, and Parker pointed out that I had some other topics mixed in there. And then my professional jobs have been a mix of policy, community services, regulation. I'm predisposed to thinking that interdisciplinarity is a good thing. But it isn't just me. In the last decade especially, it has become something of a consensus that to solve our wicked problems, to borrow the phrase coined by Riddle and Weber in the 1970s, a lot of interesting stuff happened in the 1970s. We have to step outside of reductionist models of how scientific and social questions operate, engage in problem solving across disciplines. The Mitchell Center is at the heart of that exploration in Maine. Founded in 2014, they have been invaluable in promoting community-centered research. As an example, the Mitchell Center team, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy, developed the strategy and structure for the now very popular Community Resilience Workbook. But the workbook was only possible because dozens of people in the community resilience sector stepped forward, largely at the prompting of CCAP, DEP, and DACF, to contribute material. In the later stages of keeping the workbook updated, and now in the current project to turn it into an online portal, Parker, Nate Robbins, and Judy East have been a few of the most prominent faces of this labor of love, but there's an enormous interdisciplinary community behind it making it possible. Of course, when we used to mostly work within a network specific to our discipline, it was easier to see all or most of the parts. When we start to add other disciplines, the networks are joined and the nodes multiply fast. Working across silos is important and necessary, but it's complicated. Okay, time to catch our breath for a minute. That's a lot of complicating factors. We've now thought about the increasing number of nodes in the network, the decentralization of what used to be government responsibilities, and the need for interdisciplinary approaches. Considering all of that, we're actually doing pretty well. In professional circles, we mostly are still talking to each other, mostly finding each other, and we're definitely getting some incredible work done. But I have to admit that it feels a little overwhelming sometimes, especially in a season of uncertainty. And I don't think I'm alone. It makes me wonder how all of this translates to the community level. What is it like to be in the shoes of a volunteer or part-time municipal official who is trying to navigate these networks with limited visibility and a lot of volume to work through? Are we asking volunteers to be superheroes who commit significant time to navigating a process? Can we imagine a system in which superhero volunteers are still valued, but in which someone can be a regular volunteer, committing a reasonable amount of time, and still be able to consistently find and administer the resources to advance projects that are important to their community? That question has been part of the impetus for the formation of a new office, the Maine Office of Community Affairs, or MOCA, which I lead. Let me talk about the formation of this new office for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to the question of networks and how we can develop more visibility into our networks. MOCA was formed in 2024 in response to a need for more coordination across state government and with partners. The effort is focused on internal state government reorganization and on the connections with organizations outside of state government. Some of the key things we're trying to achieve are to make it easier for communities to find and make use of state planning and resilience resources, improve and align state programs so that they better achieve the intended results, and partner with other organizations in ways that foster success for communities. MOCA is going to be a combination of existing programs which will move into the office from other departments and newly created programs. The existing programs that are proposed to move are the Housing Opportunity Program, the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, Community Resilience Partnership, the Floodplain Management Program, the Coastal Program, Volunteer Maine, and the Code Enforcement Program. Those of you who are familiar with the former State Planning Office, and there are some of you in this room who worked for the former State Planning Office, will recognize that a number of those programs were in that office. You may also note that there are some pretty fundamental differences between the State Planning Office and MOCA. MOCA's mission is very community-facing. This is a through line in all of the programs that are going to be in our shop. Some of the bigger picture statewide policy setting duties of the former State Planning Office, including the state economist, will not be part of MOCA's role. In addition to the programs that are moving, there are also two programs that are being created. The new State Resilience Office is being staffed from the $69 million NOAA Challenge grant that the state received last year. We're in the hiring process currently for those positions, and the office should be up and running over the summer. Specifically related to storm preparedness, LD1 proposes to create the Flood Ready Maine program within the State Resilience Office. And LD1 is making its way through the legislature right now. It's out of committee and waiting to be acted on. This is a program that will provide technical assistance and better flood hazard data for both inland and coastal areas. It includes a network of certified floodplain managers in each of the regions of the state. All the programs slated for MOCA touch directly on a community's ability to chart their own course for strengthening their resilience to weather events and for planning for the future of their community. So what can we do by bringing these programs together? What are we going to accomplish? In broad terms, we're going to provide a one-stop shop for communities That involves delivering technical assistance and grant funding, but it also involves coordinating state programs on the back end so that when communities look into our system, they see opportunities that are straightforward and consistent. By aligning our incentives and policies, and by reducing the administrative burden on communities and service providers, it will make it simpler for communities to spend more time working on the projects that are meaningful to them and less time trying to navigate the system. That idea of a one-stop shop might feel kind of theoretical, so let me share some sample initiatives that we're either exploring or have underway. This is not an exhaustive list, and it's possible that not all of these will be accomplished in the short term, but having some examples can be grounding. Something that's currently underway is a project to create a searchable database to bring funding opportunities together in one place. Instead of having to search around in several different agency websites to try to understand which funding opportunities might be appropriate for a given project, this database will allow communities to home in on the specific opportunities that are most likely to be a good fit. We've also started discussions with other state and federal agencies about providing multi-agency pre-application input for projects. I'm not sure what this will look like at the end of the day, but it's something we've heard would be helpful to communities and also to state agencies that are trying to provide timely advice and avoid project delays. One really interesting possibility is the potential for grant programs to be run with a common application form. It's possible several grant programs could be combined into one application process, with staff working in the background to figure out which funding source is a good match for each project. From what I understand, this is done in New York and Utah already, and it seems like it would be a huge efficiency gain for navigating the many small grant programs that state government provides. In a small rural state like Maine, this should be doable. At a minimum, standardizing some of the application materials would make it more efficient for communities and service providers to apply. As we're forming MOCA, it's in the front of our minds that we're committed to working with regional organizations and nonprofits to deliver services closer to the communities. We know that often the trusted voice is the one that's closest to the community. Right now, regional organizations have small contracts with multiple state agencies that have different funding cycles, reporting requirements, and application forms. And the performance requirements can be extremely topic specific. Interestingly, the one thing that we don't provide significant funding for is basic comprehensive planning. So the state provides funding for transportation planning, or resilience planning, or housing planning, but not much to tie all that together in a foundational plan. I think we can do better. And perhaps most importantly, we focused on high-quality customer service so that when communities call us, they will get the answers they need without having to call around. We're talking about this as a warm handoff, and we're going to develop a referral system that helps us get people to the right place the first time. That referral system concept, the warm handoff, getting people to the right place the first time, now brings me back to the issue of networks. How will we know where to send communities for the help they need? When we answer the phone, how can we get the caller to the right person on the first try? To do that, we need to have visibility into the nodes of the network. That's especially true of nodes that may be less well known or new. How can we ensure that we are equitably creating exposure for different nodes of the network? If there's an important resource that is run by people who may not have strong ties to the long-standing traditional networks, how will we know about them? And how can we make sure that they receive the same level of attention as more established partners? As you can imagine, this question keeps me up at night. In some number of months, depending on when the biennial budget goes into effect, MOCA will need to be ready to answer the phone. When we get to that point, we're going to need to deliver high quality, consistent service. To do that, we're going to need some tools. Tools that, as far as I know, don't exist today. As a result, I started asking questions of many people I meet. Questions like, is there an existing software tool that would allow people to self-subscribe to some kind of network model that would let us make appropriate referrals? Is there some way we can make it easier for potential project partners to find each other by subscribing to such a model? Would having a model that makes our network visible make it easier to find unique service niches and avoid duplication? Recently, David was gracious enough to invite me to the Mitchell Center to talk to some faculty and staff at the lecture series. That conversation both affirmed the need for some kind of tool and provided some intriguing brainstorms about elements that could be explored. While I recognize that we're a nascent office with only so many resources, and we are not going to become a tech startup that launches the next whiz-bang software product, I do think it's worth considering whether there's an application here for some kind of artificial intelligence assisted directory in the long run. The students validated the need for such a tool and had thoughts about how it might be used. Faculty brought up the possibility of an algorithm-based product, sort of like Netflix. Of course, we need to make it the anti-Netflix, so that the results you get don't funnel you to the same places every time. That they suggest interesting new places to go for the resources you need. It's all well and good that in my YouTube feed there's plenty of hiking videos, mystery series, French language lessons, and silly pet videos. But that sameness would be the wrong model to apply when getting serious about creating change in a community or a state. And then once it's built, where should it live? Should it be managed by one entity? Should it be distributed and decentralized like blockchain? Or is all of this way too much and I need to go get some Rolodexes at the thrift shop? At this point, I risk going down the tech rabbit hole, so let's lift our gaze a bit and return to the broader issue, which is that visibility into our networks is something that we're struggling with. It's an equity issue, it's an efficiency issue, and it's an issue of being able to be in healthy relationships with our work and with each other. In times of uncertainty, at least being able to see what the options are and who our potential partners might be can provide some measure of psychological safety, and it will make us more effective in pivoting when necessary. Some of you might be wondering why we're only talking about networks in Maine. I think that's a fair question. Maybe it's partly because I feel like that's enough of a challenge, and I don't know yet how I would understand the next phase of work to get beyond Maine. Maybe it's partly because I'm in state government, and so state government is the sphere on which I have most influence. And maybe it's partly because it seems like in this next era, this season of uncertainty about the federal role, states are likely to play an even stronger role than they have in the past. Maine has been a leader in climate, resilience, and infrastructure work. And frankly, our best shot at continuing to make progress for the benefit of communities and our state is to work where we have the most influence. I hope we build a tool to help us all see each other. But in the meantime, we can take strength from what we have already built and how we are already supporting each other, as messy as it sometimes may be. So my good friends and colleagues, let's build the next iteration of this remarkable network while we are flying it. Let's remember that everything we are working on is in support of other nodes of the network, whether we can see it at the time or not. And that there are other people out there working on projects that will eventually support us, whether or not we ever make the connection. There is so much progress, so much momentum, that even in this season of uncertainty, we are going to do great things together. The next time we are together at this gathering in the next mud season, we will be celebrating all that has gone right because our networks held us together. Thank you.